welcome to another edition of Living a Good Life. My name is Brad Fain, and today I am honored to be here with Karen Fann, a resume that just goes on and on and on. Political guru, Prescott Council, Mayor Pro Tem, Chino Valley Mayor and Council. Then you took the leap up to the state, which a lot of people try, and not everybody's successful going from a small town to the state. But you did the House, and you were the Speaker at the House for a while, or nope, just in the House?
Just in the House for 3 terms.
3 terms in the House, and then you moved over to the Senate, and you just took a break, we'll call it, maybe not full retirement, but a break for now, and you were the outgoing president of the Senate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So quite an amazing political career, but maybe some things people don't know is you're also a small business owner. Mm-hmm. Born and raised here in
not born, but moved
raised
here when I was 4, so close enough.
Close enough, right? At some point, we just kind of say,
My brother Mike was 1, so.
There you go. So welcome.
Thank
We're
you.
really glad to have you here. And just want to talk about the nexus of the show is like what goes into making a good life, living a good life. And everybody has their own definition. Could be running for politics is what makes a good life for some, and others being in business in the private sector, and other people being retired. And we're all in different stages of our life. So I'd just like to explore that with you and kind of glean some wisdom from you from all your years of experience.
Look who's talking, right?
And maybe like what's next? Maybe you can tease us. I know you're taking a break and you've officially got a timeout on politics, but somebody like you can't stay quiet for too long. So with that, let's just talk about your politics. So what made you want to run in the very first place? So we'll go way back to Prescott and even Chino Valley. Why did you want to get involved at the council levels and ultimately mayor in Chino?
I didn't.
All right.
And that's the God honest truth, right?
So who forced you in?
So I know.
What did they have on you?
Interesting story is I had started my business, Arizona Highway Safety Specialist, and I had been in about 5 years, I guess, and I mentioned to my assistants, I said, now that the business is going, because I believe in giving back to your community in some way. You volunteer, you do something. And I said, I think I will volunteer for one of the boards, Parks and Rec or Planning and Zoning, something. And that way I could run my business and still give back to my community. And a few months later, I went away on a ski trip and Telluride. And the first day out, I wiped out and broke my pelvic bone in 5 places.
Oh.
So I was in the hospital. In the meantime, while my family is out skiing, having a good time, back here in Prescott, they had just had elections in November, and there was a lady by the name of Tony Allen was her name, that was elected, and then she resigned on New Year's Day, or the day after New Year's, because she married our city attorney, John Moffitt. And so consequently, there was an opening. My assistant said, Karen said she wanted to volunteer for something. So they went down to City Hall and picked up an application. Well, it was like a letter of interest sort of thing. And they filled it out and sent it in. And when
Unbeknownst to you?
Unbeknownst to me, did not
God.
know. So I was in the hospital in Telluride for a week, and then I was in a hospital here in YRMC for a week. And I get home, of course, there's this huge stack of paperwork I have to sign and contracts. And I get to this one thing, and now mind you, I'm still on massive drugs and I'm on a walker. And I said, what is this? And they said, you said you wanted to volunteer for something. I said, so what am I volunteering for? And they go, Prescott City Council, we put your name in. And that's how I got involved with politics. So
Nice.
There were 32 people that put their name in, and they picked me. So that's how I started there. And then when my business was growing, I needed more land, and Prescott was just getting too expensive on a small company trying to grow. And so I bought 5 acres out in Chino Valley, right off of 89, and built my new building and my business there. And after I'd been there a few years, the council there came to me and said, we want you to be on the Chino Council, and which I said, no, you guys are crazy out here. All you do is complain and get mad at each other. I said, I did my duty. And so they left me alone a couple of years. Well, then one of their council people, Norm, had cancer and had to resign 8 months early, and we were right in the middle of all of the contract stuff going on with the Willow Lake and Watson Lake, the sale of it. Remember, we were buying all that, as part of the Yes for Prescott movement, excuse me. And he had to quit 8 months early, and they came to me and they said, would you please just do it for 8 months to get us through this? You know the water stuff, you know how important this is, and you've been involved with it. And I said, all right, I'll do it for 8 months. Well, about 3 months later, they said, by the way, we already decided you're going to be the next mayor. And so I ended up being the mayor for 3 terms after that.
So what was like what would you look back and say, like, for Prescott and then for Chino, what you're most proud about of your term being involved in those two bodies?
Well, we were going through some major growth at the time. I mean, in the 90s, I was on the Prescott City Council in the mid-90s. So that was still coming out of, the recession that we had in the 80s. But we did that whole Yes for Prescott campaign where we bought the lake so we could secure our water resources in Prescott. The mall was being built. I mean, that was a whole fight in itself. You wouldn't believe how many people didn't want a mall here. And the Costco, right? Putting the Costco
was
in.
a big issue.
So we've always had this, not in my backyard, which is interesting because most of the people now are people that came here from somewhere else. And if we had had that attitude before, they wouldn't be living here. So it's kind of interesting. When I moved here in '58, my parents moved us here. The population of Prescott was 6,000 people. And Prescott Valley did not exist. It was still called Jackass Flats, as you well know. Chino Valley's population was 300 people, and it wasn't even a town. It was just an unincorporated area. So our whole Quad City area has grown so much. So back to your question is what am I proud about? I'm proud of the smart growth we did. Planning for the future, knowing that this is a beautiful place for people that want to move here, that want to live here, and you have to plan it and do it right. If you just allow willy-nilly subdivisions, what we call wildcat subdivisions, and people start, drilling exempt domestic wells, and unchecked, and they just, and the sewers, no sewer, so we're in septic. And you asked what we did in Chino Valley. That was another huge thing, is we built the very first wastewater treatment plant out there. A lot of people don't know that about Chino Valley, is that they really had no water system of any kind, so everybody was on well, in addition to City of Prescott and all the wells that they have in there that they draw water and send it down here to Prescott. But everybody's on septic. And we started seeing nitrate levels in the more condensed areas like Chino Meadows, where those were a lot of manufactured homes and trailers. And we started seeing nitrate levels on the rise, and we were about that far away from the EPA coming in and shutting us down, which most people don't even know about. So we built that wastewater treatment plant, and for a town that had no money, we did a pretty good job at it because we made all the new people pay for it and found a great contractor that was willing to build it, run it, and finance it for us. And that's how we got our wastewater treatment plant.
And that was in the early 2000s?
That was in the 2000s.
Yeah. It's amazing those stories of you say planning for growth, and I think that's what we're struggling with as all the communities are right now. Is the NIMBYism has always been here since I grew up here, and every year it was always, we're the last ones in, close the door. I mean, you just grow up with that, and but yet they all want their one thing. I remember like a few years ago it was always like, no more growth, well, except for a Trader Joe's. We would accept the Trader Joe, but nothing else. And there's always the except for what they want. And it's interesting because you make a great point. They've all moved here from somewhere, and yet they want to stop it once they get here. And if it weren't for leaders like yourself and many others to plan for that growth, when you were telling the story about the sewer, I think about when Prescott Valley was doing their sewer. And the challenge they had is they didn't have a water company. So they were being serviced by water by a private provider They had all septics. Same story. We just keeps repeating itself. And how do you get a sewer in there? Well, first you got to have the water system to be able to bill. Makes it a lot easier, anyways. And Prescott Valley went through that whole growth period. And you think back of what if those leaders didn't take on that challenge then? I mean, how expensive would it be today to do it? And it never gets cheaper. And
Well, not just expensive, Brad, but in addition to that, we talk about our water concerns that we have here. We're not in Sayfield, we know that. We are ground mining water because we're not recharging enough. Well, one of the reasons why we're not recharging enough is because for so many decades, we didn't have wastewater treatment plants in Prescott Valley or Chino Valley, and so none of that water was getting recharged. So everybody had exempt domestic wells, everybody's pulling it out, and it's just going away. But with the new wastewater treatment plants these days, we can recharge anywhere between 90 and 95% of all the water that we use.
yeah, it's amazing when you think about it, and you just think about that closed system almost, where you can pull the water out, put it in a tank, deliver it to the house. From the house goes back to the treatment plant, cleaning, and almost goes right back in. I mean, the technology's there, we could do it. It's a matter of all of us accepting that loop.
Right.
But it would stretch our water so much further. And so it is interesting how we struggle with that today. And maybe we'll just kind of stay on the local flavor, your experience of the decisions you made both at the City of Prescott and Chino Valley as a leader. What do you see facing our local communities? We'll just throw everybody up here, the Quad Cities, into it. What do you see as the biggest challenge for the public leaders in helping us plan for our future?
Well, we've got the same problem that we've had for 40, 50, 60 years, is that we have a lot of new people that have moved here. And God bless them, 99% of them are all great people. There's about 1% I'm like going, if you really wanted California, don't bring your California here. So we still have that not in my backyard, I'm here now, pull up the drawbridge attitude with a lot of them. So it's still having to deal with that. But you can't just say, okay, we're going to shut everything down. I'll give you a prime example is, the concerted efforts that are going on right now with Save the Dells. We all know that is a beautiful part of our history around here, and we know that it is something that we would like to preserve. Now, some of that it started out as Save the Dells. Then there were a lot of other people that got involved with it, and they said, oh, we're not going to just save the Dales. Now we're going to save this mountain, and we're going to go over here to Prescott Valley, and now we're going to save Glassford Hill Mountain. And it is now turned into thousands of acres of what they want to save. And it's like, okay, are we really saving something that's historical for a reason, like the Dales, or possibly the top of Granite Mountain? Glassford Hill, if that's something that's important. But why are we going to try and save all of these thousands of acres, hundreds of acres in between? And obviously, part of that motive is stop the growth.
Yeah, there are no growthers, and they have the Save the Dells banner up as their Trojan horse walking into the conversation.
Right.
It's all about saving something.
It's about saving something, and I know, the intentions of saving the Dales is absolutely spot on. I love it, and I totally understand that. They have come down and spoken to me for, the last 6 years. I've been down in the Senate, and especially as Senate President, and they come down and they go, well, we need money. I said, how much money and for what? And they go, well, we're going to buy it. We're not quite sure. Well, now the price tag is somewhere over $10 million, and they want us to turn it into a state park. And I said, okay, first of all, I said, it won't be 10 million. Trust me, it's going to be more than that because everything goes up every day. And I said, and you want the state to do another state park so that the taxpayers are on the hook for maintaining it with loss of property tax revenues that would go back into the community to support services. I mean, I went through the whole list of when you get too big, it now becomes something that is can potentially be detrimental instead of an asset. And I said, but if this is what the communities want, I said, I think you ought to do what we did with Yes for Prescott when we built the mall and we bought the lakes, Willow and Watson Lake, and the CVID, Chino Valley Irrigation District, for those that don't know what CVID is. And I said, we put it before the voters and explained why it was a good thing. And the voters taxed themselves a half-cent sales tax for, I'm trying to remember if it was 20 years, I think, to do this.
Yeah.
And they did it, and they said, "Oh well, no, we can't go to the taxpayers because they won't fund it." And I said, "It's because what? It's not that important to them." I said, "I can't imagine that saving the Dales isn't important to most people, at least in the Prescott area." And they said, "Oh yeah, but there's so much money involved, and we need more than that." So I said, "Therein lies your problem. If your own people aren't willing to put their money where their mouth is to help this, even if the state came in and helped a little bit, but you want the state to do it 100% and take on the liability and the maintenance of it from here on out." So that's a big challenge that's going on right now in our Quad City area.
One of the things I always wish they would get focused on, because they do use the open space as a big hammer to try to stop growth, and it's this wildcat development that you spoke about a little while ago. If we're really concerned about preserving open space and we want to preserve places, then we should encourage development in municipalities and not so much in the county. I know the county needs their revenue sources, but they have means of getting revenue sources. They have the property taxes, which is their big one. But it seems like when you have these master planned communities, you get more density and you get better planned growth and you leave more space for open space.
That is correct.
Where you have the wildcat development, you're at 2-acre minimums because that's the default zoning that encompasses our entire area, and you get what you see out there. You go look north of 89A and you can see what's happened.
Wide
and
open
spaces.
Spaces.
It looks like we're sprawled out, but be interesting to count the homes that are north of 89A. And it's like, is that a Granville? But yet the land mass is probably 10 times of a Granville development. And that's where I really think the public leaders need to go to is, to your point early on, we did smart growth. We planned for our future by securing water. Today we need to continue the water discussion. We're never going to be done with water, and we just have to come to terms with that. Water will always be a conversation that needs to take place, but really start talking about, we're going to grow. How do we want to grow? What do we want to look like? Where do we want houses? Where do we want development to occur? What kind of jobs do we want to attract? That's one of the big things that we're wrestling with as a company is everybody we talk to, it's like, well, I need employees. The hospital's down, boy, I think one time I heard they needed like over 300 people. And they're not all doctors. And that's where people get confused. They're not all heart surgeons. There's family doctors. There's all kinds of doctors. There's nurses. There's staff that take care. There's people that cook the food. There's so much that goes into the hospital that people don't even realize. And then you talk to the community college and they need employees. You talk to the school districts, all of them, Chino Valley, Prescott Valley, they all need teachers. And it always comes back to the same answer. Why can't you get employees here? Well, they can't afford to live here.
Correct.
They can hire them. They attract them every year. The school districts are really, it's sad. I was talking to John Podest, and he said, yep, we need 45 teachers. We'll hire 45 teachers. We can find them. They will come. And then they work for about a year, and then they get a better job in Phoenix and a better job is defined as pay relative to the cost of living. And so they move to Phoenix because everything's a little more in balance down there as far as the cost of living, and they lose them. And so then the next year, they got to go out and get 45 more teachers. And it's just a vicious circle we're in. We need to really address the affordability of housing for the entire service sector. And I think that's an important conversation that I think leadership of all sorts needs to be taking on in our communities.
Well, and it's something that, and that's always been a huge debate too, which is, my hat's off to the Fain Signature Group, because it's something that you guys are addressing, particularly here on the Prescott Valley area. Your family has been very blessed to be able to have the foresight to be able to look into the future, and you've got you have the resources and the land to be able to actually do something that is so good for the community. I mean, you guys have done so much already, but I know you're working on an affordable housing project right now that would help out not only the service industry but the teachers and the kids that are just getting out of school and married and getting started and want to invest
Well, I'm
in
selfish.
something.
I want my kids to be able to move back here. It's
Exactly.
selfish, right?
I know.
You see this and you're like, why can't people grow up here and then stay?
Right.
I mean, we are, the whole region, we're an exporter of amazing talent.
Mm-hmm. That's
We raise them here, they go to our schools, and then they leave because they can't stay here.
The other interesting thing, I'm going to just throw this in as we're talking about the whole growth and everything else. So we've been talking about this Quad City area here, but let's bring this out a little bit because we also talk about on a statewide level and the water resources and how all of us affect each other. What goes on here affects what goes on in Prescott. We've got the Verde River, we've got the headwaters just north of us. There are so many things, but of all the new people that have moved here, it's amazing how many do not know that of all of Arizona, only about 18% of our land is privately owned. Only about 18% of our land in all of Arizona is actually paying property taxes to support our schools and to support our roads and our police and all those things that make up a community. 18%.
Yeah.
So that means the other 82% is all non-private. Why is that non-private? Well, it's because there's like 10 million acres that belong to the state land department. We have national forests. We've got the Coconino National Forest. We've got the Prescott National Forest. We have all the BIA and BLM Native American land. There is so much that is open space. You can go anywhere just outside our back door and you can see just miles and miles and miles upon miles of absolutely nothing but beautiful Arizona. Yeah. And so when we say, oh, we're growing too fast, well, we're not growing too fast because we've actually planned this. But what they're seeing is because we're all concentrated in a little area. And when you see that most of the people are all here in Prescott Valley, Chino Valley, you just go north of Chino Valley and you go up to that Paulden area. Yeah, they've got some wildcat subdivisions out there and they've got some ranches out there, but you don't see the wall-to-wall houses up there because everybody is trying to do everything here in this small area.
That's a really great point. That I think my dad used to say that all the time. 18% is private land, and it is a big burden. You've got a minority of the land ownership that is being asked to support a majority of the bill. And there is a lot that comes out of that. And when we propose development, that I'm always like, well, you're always for higher taxes. You always want something more. If you would approve this subdivision, then you're going to take land that is grazing land, that is paying grazing rates, and we're going to put houses on it, and the property values are going to go through the roof, and then you're going to get more tax revenue. And so it helps the system. If we continue to grow at a responsible rate, we have to keep managing our resources. And land is one of them that we have to manage. And I think we've done a fairly good job when you look at where the master plan communities have, in all the communities that have shown up. And everybody's getting so creative. You can go to any one of the communities and point to a well thought out master plan community because they have to. And that's how we have to look at it, because that way we get the sidewalks, we get the curbs and the gutters, and we get the parks and the open space. But we also get the affordability.
Right.
If everybody was on a 2-acre lot, not many people could afford to live here.
That's true. That's absolutely true.
So growth is a challenge for us going forward, and there's some conversations that need to happen, I think, among all of our communities, individually and collectively. I think growth is one of those things that they should be aligned on and work together on, and I know that there's always been a tension between the communities, and I've always lived the Prescott Valley-Prescott tension because we're here in Prescott Valley, and that tension was always there. It seemed like it was starting to get tampered down when the two communities came together to do the water farm and start planning of the importation of water from out in the Big Chino. But lately, it seems like the conflict between the communities is starting to get a little amped up. Do you have any thoughts on that? And like maybe where does that end for our community as a citizen living here if we don't turn that around?
And that's really an interesting concept because I have noticed how it's cyclical and it's coming back, right? It used to be that when we call it Old Prescott, Old Chino, and Old Prescott Valley, at least we all knew each other. Harvey Skoog was on the council and mayor here for 20-some years,
We were
right?
so lucky to have him. Stable, steady leadership.
I was on the Prescott Council when he was here. So consequently, we did a lot, and we did a lot together. And then when I was on Chino Valley, he was still here, and Rolly Simmons was in Prescott, and the three of us did a lot of things together. So in the early days, when you had all of us old timers, if you will, that were on these council, the competition we had was primarily competition for the growth. It was Prescott Valley, it was a new budding community. They wanted some retail. They wanted to be able to start building their community out here. Prescott saw it as a threat. Oh my God, they're going to take our Walmarts. They're going to take, well, let me back up. I remember in a time that even mentioning Walmart in this area was like a four-letter word because it was a big box store. By God, we're not having any big box stores here, but that was another time. But then it evolved into, well, my gosh, Prescott Valley is going to be getting, a Sam's Club or do this, and we're going to lose it over here. And we're saying, yeah, but we really don't have the land in Prescott anymore to support this kind of stuff. Hence, the mall came up. Hence, that was one of the reasons why the mall got pushed, is because it was going to be in Prescott. We were going to annex it so we could keep some of that sales tax revenue in Prescott so that Prescott Valley didn't keep marching down Highway 69 and take it all.
Yeah.
So it was interesting because the fights back then was over the growth itself of us wanting
Over the
that
sales
growth.
taxes.
Because it
You
was
guys
a
were
sales
taking
tax.
territory to get your revenues for your
Absolutely.
communities. So
Absolutely.
you could support your police and roads and all your infrastructure.
And in the meantime, out in Chino Valley, the Chino Valley area was still, we want to still be our farming, ranching community. And we could see Prescott was starting to annex north. And at the time, Dan Main was the mayor, which kind of started leading up to that whole era. Well, they did, I can't even remember how many thousands of acres, Dan, we went from like 10 square miles to 65 square miles.
Oh, wow.
Annexed what Chino Valley did. It was this small rural community, and then under Dan Main's leadership, this was just before I got on council, they had done all of this annexation of many of the ranches. They came all the way down to what we know is 5 South right now, and it was all done to stop growth from Prescott or anybody growing north. So, and then of course the other challenge is, as I mentioned before, there's Prescott Valley has, I believe, 7 wells in downtown Chino Valley, and I think they've got a few more somewhere else if I remember. But anyway, then the water wars came. You're stealing our money, our water out of Chino Valley. You're doing this. So we had a battle over water for 20 years between Chino and Prescott. So the dynamics of the fighting we had over. We wanted the growth to what we see now. Now we have people on the council that are new here, haven't lived here very long, and consequently, they don't know the entire history of how this all came about. And so now we're back into, not in my backyards, now we're going to shut down growth, we're going to do, and we're seeing that with some of the council people in Prescott, some of the council people in Prescott Valley. And it's also it's all of a sudden become an anti-growth type of councils right now. And they have to understand that if you do not plan and plan smart, you end up with bad end results. And I hope that the new council, as they turn over in the next 2 years or 4 years, I certainly hope that we can get some people that are on the council that can look at both sides and say, look, how do we save the things we want to save and do a good job doing that, but how do we manage the future of our Quad City area so that there's room for those that want to be here, that we can actually live and thrive and have good teachers and good schools and good revenues, tax revenues that will support those things that we need.
And I think I agree with absolutely what you're saying. And I think what I've noticed is, I call it policy. The elected officials may not call it policy, but they can come out and say they're for growth, but then they put in place requirements that limit growth. I think Prescott, with their new water policy, that whole council can say they support growth, but their water policy that they adopted really limits growth. Mm-hmm. And so I think what I would say to the voter out there is pay attention, because they can say one thing, but then their policies they implement make it more and more difficult for growth to occur. And then they can just sit there and say, well, we're for it. The developers can't get a project through. It's not us. It's on them. And that's a big concern I have, because that's a backhanded way to legislate when you've been elected and entrusted with the best interest of the community by the voters, and you're supposed to be standing up there functioning for the best interest of the community. And sometimes that means we're going to approve a subdivision, and sometimes that means we're not going to approve a project. Like, we're going to protect the Dells. We're not going to allow a project to go there. And that takes a lot of backbone from public leaders, because as you well know with your career, you get a lot of arrows thrown at you when you make a decision or you're leaning a direction that's not popular by certain groups.
That's 100% true. They've got to, if you're going to be in politics, whether it's on a local level or a statewide level, you've got to do your homework. You have to look at both sides. You have to listen to both sides and understand where that balance is and understand what's good. The worst thing that any elected official can do is to try and play the political game, and they end up swaying. So if all of a sudden, I have seen people who were committed to know all the right reasons why they were going to vote yes or no on an item, and 5 minutes before the vote is called, before we walk into that chamber or walk onto the floor, somebody got to them. And when I say got to them, I mean literally threatened them, bullied them. I'm going to pull out a recall petition on you, against you. I'm going to do this. And they did not have the fortitude to say, I'm sorry, this is the way I'm voting, and this is why I'm voting this way, because this is what's best for our community or our state. And we don't have enough of those people that are doing that.
As you were telling that story, I just think my mind was going to Harvey Skook, because I knew him the best of all the mayors, but he had that ability to sit there and listen to people threaten him, threaten the entire council, and thank him for their words and their comment, and thank him for participating, and then proceed to move forward with what he thought was the best interest. And I think as a result, we had the best 25 years Prescott Valley has ever had. And that's just stable, steady leadership. And to your point, we're swaying. And whenever we see sway, it doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on, it's not going to be good for either side. Because it could sway against the no-growthers, or it could sway against the growthers. And so you just want steady direction.
And that's what is so important in politics, much less everything else. It's like a pendulum, right? And we're okay. That pendulum will swing a little to the right, swing a little to the left. Sometimes it does this. It's when all of a sudden we let that pendulum go too far to the left, too far to the right, whether it's growth, whether it's politics, whether it's anything. That's when we get in trouble, because once it starts swinging that way, there's only one way to go, is it's going to have to swing all the way back here again until you can start getting it tapered down. And that's what we're seeing in politics right now. That pendulum is just out of control right now. And quite honestly, that's one of the reasons why I'm taking a little break, besides wanting to get some personal time. It was just, it's crazy right now.
That concludes the first half of the conversation with my good friend, Karen Fann. We'll see you here next time for part 2. I'm Brad Fain. Thank you for listening to this episode of Living a Good Life.